The only people who don't want to disclose the truth are people with something to hide.
Say live and let die.
Good evening and welcome to Live and Let Live on the Logos Radio Network. I'm Gary Johnson. We are live on Sunday, February 10th. And you can hear us every Sunday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, 8 Central, 7 Mountain, and 6 Pacific. Archives of this program are available at logosradionetwork.com. In this hour, we're talking with Richard B. Sanders. He was a justice of the Washington State Supreme Court for 15 years. And his website is www.justicesanders.com. He is a man of strong opinions about many things having to do with judges and so forth. And we're going to be talking about his opinions on the various subjects, which he expresses on his website, justicesanders.com. We are going to talk in particular about a client that he's representing called Linda Jordan. And she is someone who has been sanctioned by the Washington State court system, including the Supreme Court, for about $13,000. This is I find to be kind of unusual because I believe she's not an attorney. So how this happens, we'll talk about this in some detail. Richard B. Sanders, welcome to Live and Let Live.
Well, thanks for having me on.
Well, Judge Sanders, you were on the state Supreme Court for 15 years. I wonder if you could kind of give us a little background about your legal training and your experience and so forth.
Well, I graduated from the University of Washington in 1969. I also played in the Rose Bowl for the Huskies, albeit the French horn. Then I practiced in the private sector for 26 years until I ran for the state Supreme Court in 1995. I got elected and reelected in 98 and in 2004 and was not fortunate enough to be reelected in 2010. So, yes, I spent about 15 years on the state Supreme Court, wrote over 600 opinions, probably had the record number of dissents on the state Supreme Court, wrote law review articles and all the rest. So, it was my concern then, and as it is now, that the rights of private citizens be recognized and protected. I think the government gets away with way too much, and it should be the first responsibility of the court to protect the rights of the private citizen.
All right, I want to talk about some things in detail, but I'm kind of curious, what motivated you to run for judge in the first place?
Well, as I said, I practiced in the private sector for 26 years. Mm-hmm. I had many cases that were against the government, trying to protect private citizens. And I thought that the courts were, frankly, biased in favor of the government. And I thought that maybe if I could get on the court, I could do something about this. And I certainly tried.
I know that you ran to try to get your job back, and you were actually endorsed by Ron Paul. How did that come about?
Well, I've always been a fan of Dr. Paul's. While I was on the court, I couldn't publicly express that. But when I was off the court, and he came up to the Seattle area and the Vancouver area, I had the opportunity to introduce him to the citizens of this state, and I endorsed him. And then when I was running for re-election, he endorsed me. So, and I'm happy that I did endorse him. He's a real hero for me.
All right. Well, we may talk a little bit more about that later. I want to get into this particular case which you have agreed to represent here, Judge. This is the case of Linda Jordan, and you can probably fill in some more details here, but as I understand it, she is a voter in the state of Washington. She's a housewife, and she is convinced that Barack Obama is not eligible to be president, and she challenges his eligibility on the basis of her belief that the birth certificate that has been provided is a forgery. She also says that his Social Security number doesn't seem to match up with the E-Verify system. And so, as I understand it, she filed a suit, or she filed something. You can explain to us what she filed in August of last year, challenging his eligibility and challenging whether his name should appear on the ballot. And her case was, her case really didn't get very far, I'll put it that way. And but what was particularly interesting about this is that the judge, sanctioned her about $13,000, and a 5-judge panel of the 9-judge state Supreme Court upheld that, and she's facing a $13,000 bill. And I believe that you feel that that's just outrageous, and you've come to her defense. So I wondered, first of all, if you could kind of give us the background on the case, maybe a little bit better than I gave it, on what Linda Jordan was trying to do.
Yes, well, I think ultimately she was trying to keep Barack Obama's name off the ballot in the state of Washington. So she sued the Secretary of State, which seems to be the logical person to sue. However, her suit didn't get very far at the trial court level. It was dismissed in just a couple of days.
Yes.
Then she appealed to the state Supreme Court, and the Attorney General represented the Secretary of State, moved to dismiss the case as frivolous. A panel of the court agreed and directed the clerk of the court to calculate reasonable attorney fees to be awarded to the Attorney General, which the Attorney General asked for an award of $13,000, saying that Secretary of State should be reimbursed in that amount for attorney fees. The clerk of the court awarded 100% of what was requested, but it turns out that the Attorney General had actually billed the Secretary of State about $4,000, not $13,000. I discovered that after I got involved in the case, and we are attempting to have the panel of the court, or a panel of the court will review the award of $13,000 by the clerk. So that's my role in this case right now, is to try to reduce or eliminate that award. I think it's important that citizens feel free to access the courts, and when they have a case that perhaps is not meritorious, they shouldn't be punished for trying to exercise their rights.
Right. And so this is all very interesting, Richard, and I do want to go into this not only in the case of Linda Jordan, but also in the case of other people who try to get justice in our court system. The $13,000 figure, we're going to talk about whether or not it should be $13,000 or a third of that. But actually, I want to get into the issue of whether she should have been sanctioned at all. First of all, on what basis was she sanctioned?
Well, the court said it was frivolous, that she had no argument that could possibly get her any relief. And that's the standard. And when, according to the rules, if you bring a frivolous action, the court can award the other side reasonable attorney fees. So that's what they did. And maybe Linda could have approached this in some other way. I don't know, but this is where we are right now. I know other cases across the nation, or at least some other nation cases, attempting to obtain the same relief have ended up in the same way. Where the private citizen has been fined, in essence, by the court. So there you have it. If I can reduce this award of attorney fees against her, I will have done my job. That's all the best I can do at the moment.
All right. Now, I've looked at some of these kinds of cases. I don't know if we want to get into this whole issue here, but I find it kind of unusual to see someone sanctioned. I'm only aware of one case where someone was sanctioned, and in that case, the attorney for the plaintiff just didn't respond. As I understand it, what happens is the defense, always tries to get these cases dismissed. That's pretty routine. And sometimes they say this case is frivolous, and the judge informs the plaintiffs or the plaintiff's attorney, there's a motion to have this case declared frivolous. You have a certain number of days to reply and say why this case is not frivolous. Usually the plaintiff takes great umbrage that the idea that this is was frivolous, and they reply in great detail. I saw one case where the reply was like 100 pages long that this case was not frivolous, and usually the judges back down and say, okay, this is not frivolous. So I'm a little surprised that that she got sanctioned at all.
Well, Linda is not a lawyer. She
Right.
was not prepared to file a legal type brief specifying the merits of her legal arguments, and she was just hammered. So when you go into court and you're your own lawyer, you may have a fool for a client. That's the way the saying goes. So I think if she had been represented, that a good argument could have been made that it was not frivolous, but that's not the way it was.
One of the things I noticed is that sometimes lawyers are afraid to take on controversial cases like this because they're afraid of being sanctioned. And so I find it unusual that an ordinary person is sanctioned, because usually the courts, say, well, we don't expect this person to be able to make these kinds of arguments, and we know that this is just a housewife filing this case. Would a lawyer be kind of a little nervous about filing a case like this because the court might say, we're going to come down on you?
Well, yes, it's against the rules to file a frivolous case, and the court can sanction you for doing so. So I think a lawyer must try to avoid doing that.
Right.
She went to like 8 different lawyers and tried to find representation, and she couldn't find anybody to help her out. So I think that in part sort of explains this tragedy. Right. In a more general way, I think your point is well taken, and that is when you're dealing with a layperson that has no knowledge of the law, no skill of a lawyer, let's ease up a little bit, and not really take advantage of her by hitting her with such a huge fine, so disproportionate to the actual costs that her suit cost the other side. So, but that's not the way the court viewed it, at least in this type of a case. Right.
In your experience, how often are sanctions, like the loser pays, made or imposed? Well,
as a rule, the loser does not pay in the state of Washington unless there's a statute or a contract that says the loser will pay. Otherwise, the loser does not pay. I'm not sure what the rule in Texas is, but that's the rule here. So a situation like this, where there's an award of attorney fees for a frivolous action, is very unusual.
Okay. One last question about this. Actually, I'm going to have to ask you this question after the break. So we'll continue. We'll go into this issue that you have discovered, Judge, and that is that the amount that she was sanctioned is apparently an amount that was just sort of made up out of thin air and was nowhere near the real cost to the case. We're talking with Richard B. Sanders, a former justice of the Washington State Supreme Court. His website is www.justicesanders.com.
The only people who don't want to disclose the truth are people with something to hide.